Coming up on Need to Know, before the inauguration of Donald Trump as the 45th president of the United States, local political leaders share what our country and our region must do to move forward in 2017. Also on the show, they're the young, the innocent, and the vulnerable. And there's an endless struggle to keep the programs intended to help them funded. We'll examine what's happening with Child Protective Services in our region and what needs to change to keep young people safe. And a group of high school students are giving a new meaning to the well-known phrase, out of this world. From Rochester to NASA. All the details on that story just ahead. Stay with us. Need to Know starts right now. To describe 2016 as a political roller coaster ride is an understatement. We spent quite a bit of time on Need to Know dissecting the issues and the impact of last year's political climate. Now that it's a new year and a time for reflection while making plans for the weeks and months ahead, I wanted to take a look at our local political environment. National leaders from both sides of the aisle have called for unity over the past several weeks. But what does that mean, and how does that apply to our region? I thought the best guest for this conversation would be the chairs of two local political parties. Joining me at the table is Jamie Romeo, chairwoman of the Monroe County Democratic Committee. Bill Rylick, chairman of the Monroe County Republican Committee, was unable to join us for today's conversation, but I spoke with Bill earlier this week and will share portions of that interview. So Jamie, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So there are some who believe that 2016 was this year that revealed a shameful truth about our nation. They said these United States may not be so united after all. And they say that politics in the presidential election in particular was really the catalyst to reveal this division. So I pose this question to Bill Rylick, but to you first. As you reflect back on the past year, would you agree with that sentiment of division, or do you look back at it in a totally different way?
I think that the past cycle didn't necessarily bring out the worst in us, but it revealed some big problems, and that there's a lot of miscommunications and there's a lot of hard feelings. A number of people in this country have been struggling, and that's very clear. And it's been very clear that people feel that their governments or their political systems have not been working for them. And it was unfortunately advantageous for some politically to see those divisions and to further drive us apart because they knew that it could be politically expedient. But I think what it really realized is that now more than ever, we need to find ways to bring people back together because everyone is struggling in their own different ways, but the only way we're going to be able to come up with solutions is not by taking the reins and governing to our base, but by finding ways to come to the table and start creating some compromises.
Well, Bill Rylick, chairman of the Monroe County GOP, he had this to say in response to that question.
I think that the division that was exposed in 2016 was building over several years. I think that many people, I think to a large degree, a lot of the comments of our current president, President Obama, a lot of people didn't agree with his position or his thought process on several issues. Felt he should have been maybe more aggressive towards ISIS and identifying the terrorist acts for what they were, where many people felt he was reluctant to do so. Now, I'm just telling you the perspective of the people that for so many years felt that their point of view was not being expressed. I think that 2016 gave them the opportunity to say, okay, you know, we've been quiet, we've been listening to our president, we don't always agree with him, and now's our chance to go in a different direction.
Jamie, what are your thoughts in terms of that?
I think that that's a fair statement, but I think it also shows a very different style in governing that we're seeing from our current president and the president-elect. I mean, last night at 1 in the morning, or this morning, I guess I would say, the Republican leadership, at the behest or the wishes of the president-elect, voted on significant steps to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And a lot of that's happening without public conversation, without without engaging the community about what do people need. And there's a lot of fear right now, and there's a lot of fear. And whereas people may have disagreed with the president, but he was putting forth proposals and having those discussions with the nations, and that's really what we need from our president-elect going forward.
Well, you mentioned also, in terms of going forward, this coming together, both sides of the aisle working together. That's something that we've heard from national leaders, this call for unity. And Bill Reilich posed an interesting question. We'll hear from him right now in regards to that earlier this week, this call for unity.
Well, understand something. The thing that really kind of annoys me, quite honestly, is I didn't hear that for 8 years when the president would sign executive orders instead of going to Congress and working it out, working through the issues. Now, that's turning out to be probably a big mistake of his, because now when he signed it with a pen and didn't go to Congress, it can be easily undone with a pen. And now he's quite concerned about that. But why didn't I hear about unity? Why didn't I hear about working across the aisle for 8 years as the president was signing executive order after executive order, instead of going to Congress and negotiating like every other president in my lifetime has done?
Jamie, you touched upon this just a bit before we saw the video. How would you respond? And then how do you see your part in terms of this call for unity locally as the chair of the Democratic Party?
Well, I think that, there's a difference in opinions in the governing style of our current President Barack Obama. There were some executive orders that he did, but there are also very big compromises like the Affordable Care Act that he presented that Congress had to work through to get to where we are today, where you have about 20 million more Americans that have health insurance, including myself as a result of that. I think, as a community, but also larger as a nation, what we need to do to go forward is both sides have to make some concessions about what happened in the past cycle. Democrats have to recognize that not all supporters that voted for Donald Trump believe heart and heart with every statement that he's made and some of his very controversial positions. And the Republicans have to recognize that there's a very big disparity between the electoral victory in the Electoral College and the popular vote, and that there isn't necessarily this overwhelming mandate for the president-elect and his agenda, that there is the need to make sure we're bringing things to the table to have conversations in the nation. While the Electoral College obviously was very much for the president-elect, it's very clear that we're at a crossroads because it did not reflect the real will of the voters that time.
I want to localize this just a little bit. And so when we look at the political climate in Monroe County, let's look at the Monroe County legislature in particular, which has maintained this Republican majority. Are there instances that you can point to for those watching, those who would say, my gosh, let's get to the point where we can sync and work together, as you've discussed? Are there instances that you can point to and say, you know what, we were able to come up and achieve bipartisan solutions to benefit our constituents?
Having been a staffer in the county legislature for some time, I wish I could give you more examples of that. I think even just recently with the latest budget that happened, that passed for the county executive, Cheryl Denolfo, the fact that amendments were taken to cut funding from the county clerk's proposal about putting a downtown DMV office in. And then it went towards a child care program where we don't have a full understanding of, are we actually expanding the program? Are we trying to provide more services to people? Again, the need for having that conversation and the conversation with the constituents and the voters isn't happening. And I think that our county legislature should certainly be an example of where we're trying to better have those conversations, not putting forward last-minute amendments on the floor where people don't understand what we're voting on.
Well, as you may suspect, the chairman of the GOP, Bill Reilich, had a different thought on that. And he said collaboration happens more often than not. And we'll take a look at what he had to say.
I'm going to be honest with you, probably, and I don't know the exact number, but I would venture a guess that 95, if not higher, 95% of all the referrals that are introduced in the Monroe County Legislature is unanimously supported. So the misnomer that they don't work together on anything, 95% of their work, if not more, is voted and both sides unanimously support. It's only the 1 or 2 or 3 things throughout the year that doesn't occur on that draws attention, probably because it doesn't happen that often.
So, Jamie, he said 1 or 2 or 3 things that both sides don't agree on will probably take place each year. You're coming from a different standpoint, though.
Yes, and actually I would say his percentage is probably higher because the majority of the business that the county legislature does is procedural. It's accepting money from the state, putting more money into a program. But when it comes to policy decisions about a new program or expanding a program or cutting a program, those are much fewer decisions that are made. And those are the times where, when you're looking at what is the position that county government's going to do in one direction or the other, that we constantly have these differences, mostly because conversations aren't really happening between the caucuses prior to going to the floor, and that's a big concern.
Well, the economy, healthcare needs, education, the treatment of racial and ethnic minorities, these are all some of the top voting issues according to Pew in 2016. I want to ask you, based on your position, how do they rank locally for you? And when you look at the year ahead, what can we expect to see in relation to some of these issues in Monroe County?
I think that obviously, jobs and taxes and especially ethics and ethics reform right now in New York State have been the top issues. Those are what we've heard from a lot of the voters when we were talking to people. And I think that, it's going to be at a very difficult time. The proposals we're seeing coming out of Governor Cuomo's State of the State addresses are very much not in line for the initiatives that we're seeing the president-elect put out. And at some point, our federal government, our state government, and locals are going to have to find ways to work together on behalf of all of us. So this is one of the reasons why, especially the comments that the President Obama made the other night with his farewell address are so important. We have to make sure people are speaking up, getting off their social media, and really engaging and organizing in their communities, because the best way that they can make sure their priorities are being heard is if they're making that voice very clear. And I think we've been seeing that with a lot of the organizing that's been happening, especially around the potential repeal of the Affordable Care Act.
I was going to ask, realistically, how do you think we can do some of those things?
And that's by some of the basic things about just calling your local elected official's office, maybe looking at your neighboring congresspeople and see what their positions are. I mean, locally we know that Congresswoman Louise Slaughter is a staunch defender of the Affordable Care Act, but we have a lot of other members of the now majority in Congress who likely are able to vote against that. We want to make sure that as a region we're making that voice heard, making sure that we're following the state legislative session, supporting our lawmakers. I mean, we've got lots of layers of government in Monroe County, so there's a lot of ways. And then you get down to the maybe creating some balance in local representation on town boards or village trustee boards. There's a lot of opportunities.
Well, both you and Chairman Bill Riley said jobs are our main focus for Monroe County moving forward. We'll take a look at his full response on that.
I think creating jobs, because I will tell you, a lot of the issues you've just mentioned, from racial issues to all the other issues, I think a lot of those become diminished when people have good paying jobs, they're able to put food on the table and support their family. I think that's the number one concern on everyone's mind. Do they have money for tomorrow's food? Do they have money to pay the utilities, to keep a roof over their head, to keep people clothed? And when you have a job that's paying a decent wage, like we've seen for generations in Monroe County, whether it be Kodak, Bausch & Lomb, Gleason's, Xerox, and on and on and on, that those jobs have vaporized in the combination of the high tax structure of New York State with new technologies in the computer age. And now we're seeing a president that's bringing back a lot of those jobs. I think as more and more of that occurs, I think a lot of those other issues kind of become diminished because people are able to support the needs of their family.
Jamie, before we close, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond.
I think absolutely jobs are important, but it's not just about having a living wage and making sure you can support your family, but that the system is fair and that it's fair for everyone. And that's why job creation is important, but we have to make sure that on all levels that we're making sure that everybody has an equal chance in this country.
Right. We'll have to wrap for now, but I look forward, Jamie, to having you and Chairman Bill Riley together in the studio in the near future. So thank you for your time. And be sure to tune in to the live presidential inauguration of Donald Trump. That's on Friday, January 20th, starting at 11 a.m. on WXXI TV. Roadside billboards are going up around the country this month featuring the face of a Rochester child. Her name is Brooke Stagels. Police say the 3-year-old who died late last year was the victim of a homicide. Her father and his girlfriend have been charged in her death. It's the grandfather of Brooke Stagels who is putting the billboards up to raise awareness around child abuse. He has told local media outlets that Child Protective Services was notified about Brooke's situation weeks before her death. But it's no secret that CPS workers have more cases than they can handle, and the numbers are only going up. Why is this happening? How is this happening? And realistically, what can be done to help fix it? Joining me for this discussion is Bridget Hurley, policy analyst for the Children's Agenda, and John Rabish, a former CPS worker and an executive board member of the Federation of Social Workers. Welcome, and thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
So we don't have specifics or facts in regards to the claims made by Brooke Stagels' grandfather in terms of the number of calls made to Child Protective Services about that situation. But how common, or is it common for some types of complaints to be made such as that calls are made, that they're not returned, that things aren't happening because of case overload, for example?
A case overload is a huge problem. The Child Welfare League of America, which is the accepted expert in the field of children's services for the entire nation, has established 12 as the maximum caseload for CPS investigators. At the end of December, the average caseload for CPS investigators in Monroe County was 29, more than 29. So it's 2.5 times what experts in the field are saying can be effectively handled by one human being. So that leads to compromising ineffectiveness to some extent on cases. It's just more work than can be done. It would be like asking the county executive to cover Monroe, Erie, and Livingston County all at once.
Right, and as you said, this is not a brand new problem. The county itself has acknowledged the overload on caseworkers in their reports to the New York State Office of Children and Family Services. So it's been an acknowledged problem, particularly not filling vacancies. So a vacancy would be created in the division of CPS and not filled. Now, they have taken some steps to remedy that. They're running more training classes for CPS workers. They are fully funding all of the CPS positions, which in the past they would perhaps sometimes save some money by not filling a position. Now the county is committed to filling them. We still think this is not enough because of everything that John just mentioned in terms of overload. And there's also quite a bit of time between the time that you hire a CPS worker and they're fully trained and ready to go. So we have some real concerns about whether there's enough in the pipeline, and also going forward, there's no guarantee that they're not going to go back to that practice of not filling. So our primary recommendation around CPS is that the county automatically fill vacancies. Right now it has to be requested and approved. There are some divisions within the county where as soon as there's a vacancy, say for example the Sheriff's Department, as soon as there's a vacancy, that's approved to be filled. Yeah. And that's what we'd like to see in CPS.
I just want to make a point that we did invite a representative from Child and Family Services with Monroe County to join our conversation, and we will extend that opportunity to them in the future as well to be a part of this. So I want to make sure that viewers really get an understanding of the work of a CPS investigator beyond ensuring and trying to protect a child's safety. And John, I'll ask you to do this for me. Can you give us, you spent 27 years as a Child Protective Services investigator, can you give us a glimpse at the job, the role, what it involves?
Certainly. But before, I'd like to touch a little bit on the vacancy issue. We currently think there are 40 vacancies in Child Protective Services. And there were 28 positions authorized by the county executive to be filled. Unfortunately, they could only find 21 people to even accept those 28 positions, and 3 of those people that were in the training class have since dropped out. So we have 18 people to fill 40 vacancies, and we think there are many more positions that need to be added. As far as the job itself, it's a demanding, difficult, stressful, rewarding, and sometimes dangerous job. CPS investigators are given a report with allegations of abuse and/or neglect and have to go out to the home to confront the parents about what's going on in the home. Besides,
is that where the danger can come in, just the act of confronting?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's unpredictable how people will respond when confronted with having you tell them that they've neglected or abused their child. There are a lot of potential dangers. CPS workers are subjected to much verbal abuse. We've had workers that have been physically assaulted. It can be a dangerous job. But it's the part of the job that I think people don't understand is it's not just investigations. When a CPS worker goes out to a home and there's an allegation of not enough food, clothing, shelter, they don't just go back to the office and say, well, that's true. They immediately take some action to help get the family food, to help get them shelter if they don't have a home, to help get them evaluations for things like addiction, substance abuse problems. So there are other facets to the job other than just doing investigations.
Some of the data that you shared, John, from the Federation of Social Workers goes back to, we talked about case overload, and you both went into detail about that, and some of the numbers from Monroe County that you shared: 17 workers with 30 to 39 cases, 8 workers with 40 to 49 cases, 5 workers with 50 to 59 cases. So I'm trying to understand how that happens. Is there a labor agreement of some sorts in place to ensure that there are 12 cases as recommended, that 12 cases per worker. I don't quite understand how the buildup happens. Yes, you mentioned the vacancies, and we got into that. Does it all rest on that, or is there a funding issue? Are there other issues that we need to be aware of with this? Bridget?
Well, there's clearly a funding issue because there are this notion of fully funding every position as opposed to letting some vacancies continue is new. And so clearly the county is putting more resources into filling those positions, but we have a lot of work to make up in terms of that. And so as John said, even with 3 training classes being provided in 2016 and 2017, there's no guarantee that that's going to fill all of the open positions. So the other thing I would just add is that adding to this issue is that the county has cut preventive programs, which are programs to prevent families from even entering into the CPS system, and that's a real funding issue as well.
In terms of the influx of cases that you mentioned this increase from November to December, what do we know what's contributing to that? Well, beyond vacancies, it just seems the numbers are continuing to go up.
The initial spike occurred in 2015 when the local child abuse hotline was eliminated from the county operation, and all reports went directly to New York State. The local hotline folks, there was a team there that screened calls and did some work to reduce the number of cases that actually went to investigative workers, because you have to fully investigate even cases that reports that we think are somewhat frivolous at this point. The other important thing to recall or to remember for the public is a case doesn't involve one child. Cases involve multiple children. We have families of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kids, and each child has to have a safety and risk assessment done. There have to be collateral contacts made with medical people and schools, neighbors, friends. So one case may, in some ways, be like 5 or 6 cases, because you have to address the safety issues that are involved with every single child who's named in the report or living in the household.
John, you've been inside of CPS. Bridget, the Children's Agenda, you have been tracking child abuse and maltreatment issues for quite some time. And to let viewers know, you discussed some of the things, the recommendations made by the Children's Agenda, specifically when it comes to the recent Monroe County budget, the budget proposal for 2017. What are other recommendations, realistic measures besides what we've already discussed that can help to address and fix this issue?
So there's, again, the automatically filling the positions within CPS. There is increase in the number of positions, so that would then add additional workers for CPS, because it does appear that there's been this market increase. There's actually been a long-term trend of increases, but we have seen the past couple of years sort of a striking increase from year to year, so that's a real concern. And then the other thing that we recommend around CPS workers in particular is just more support and more training, more ongoing resources, because it is such a stressful job that you really need to surround these folks. We consider them full first responders. You know, they're walking into homes where there's a lot of need. So we need to support the workers that are already in place.
A special thank you to both of you. We have to wrap for now, but we'll come back, and I again invited Monroe County to join the conversation, so hopefully we can come back to this again. But for more information on what we've discussed today, be sure to check out the Children's Agenda website. That's where you can find their latest report, which is a review of the proposed Monroe County budget for 2017. Just go to thechildrensagenda.org. Well, Rochester's East High School is part of a select group chosen to participate in the Student Spaceflight Experiments program. It's a program that sends the hard work of high schoolers on a real mission to outer space. WXXI's Sasha Ann Simons joins us now with more.
That's right, Helen. A group of East High students have created a science experiment that's ready for takeoff. The trio spent weeks at the start of the school year writing a detailed proposal about how their project, which focuses on microgravity, could be useful in space. And success. Their big idea is heading to the International Space Station. I spent some time with those kids and the teacher who helped push the vision to new heights.
So you're putting the same wavelength of light through it, and then you're measuring the difference in absorbance.
When East High School chemistry teacher Mary Courtney submitted 3 proposals last fall for the Student Spaceflight Experiments program, she couldn't wait to find out which one would take off, literally.
Because this was a very difficult project. It's probably the most difficult project that our students do in their entire time in high school.
As part of the program, students from 21 schools across North America were competing for the chance to have their science experiments that test how microgravity affects various organisms sent to space.
Well, that would be a way that we could compare the two.
Students Deontay Johnson, Taylor Davis, and Binti Mohammed were thrilled that their proposal was the winning one from East High.
Miss Courtney pushed us aside, and she brought the other 2 people that were involved, and she was like, "You guys won." I was like, "Are you serious?" I started freaking out.
They chose to conduct their research on a group of microscopic organisms called phytoplankton, which live in lakes and oceans. Through the process of photosynthesis, the organism produces half the oxygen we have on Earth.
So the question is, when this goes to space, is there an effect by not having gravity on the production of the chlorophyll? And the other variable that happens is this experiment is going to be kept in a dark container. And so it's not going to be exposed to oxygen.
Oh, you can move it?
Yeah, you can move it.
Yeah, right there.
Johnson is the captain of this student spaceship.
We had a couple of different choices, but we picked mine.
So this was your idea?
It was my idea, but I had to bounce, my idea off of them a couple times just to make sure we got it correct.
The final proposal was a true team effort, though.
There was parts we all had to do. Taylor was doing the introduction, and Deontay was doing part 3 and 4 and stuff like that. So Deontay reviewed it later on and changed some certain stuff that we needed to clarify or get into more detail with.
So why did they choose phytoplankton?
As the United States and other countries move forward with space exploration, the idea eventually is to be able to establish colonies, either on the moon, other planets, right? And so you've got to be able, when you're, if you're on Mars, you've got to be able to produce food.
That means the work is far from over. The 21 winning experiments will blast off in a mini laboratory to the International Space Station in June. The first order of business for the East High team is to figure out which type of phytoplankton they'll use.
And also which, type of mixture we're going to use to make sure they have enough nutrients when they go up into space.
The students are getting acquainted with a spectrophotometer, a machine that measures the intensity of light, and is perhaps what will be their saving grace.
But are they moving?
And if you haven't guessed it already, there's a lot riding on this student project. Once the experiment is aboard the space station, astronauts will interact with it based on the guidelines set by these 3. As the person who's watched it all come to life, Courtney says she couldn't be more proud.
I want them to think completely differently about everything around them at the end of the year. And if I do that, if they think really differently about everyday subjects, then I've accomplished my goal.
Sasha Ann Simons, WXXI News.
And that wraps up this edition of Need to Know, Rochester's news magazine program. I'm your host, Helene B. and Duty Hofer. Thank you for tuning in tonight and throughout the weekend here on WXXI TV. And we appreciate those of you who join us online at WXXInews.org. I'll see you again right here next Thursday night.